Slavery, racism, and segregation. Being used as an object, as a machine, being judged and ridiculed by the way you look. The way God Himself created you to be brings you burdens because of people's judgment. And rules are made to be followed. That person of color may not drink from this fountain, as rules are made to be followed. The slaves must do exactly as the master says, no matter what he asks, because after all, they're just property, right? Why, might you ask? Because rules are rules, and these rules will be followed forever. Or so they would expect. Until one day, in Dorchester County, Maryland, Araminta Ross was born into slavery with her 9 siblings by her parents Ben Ross and Harriet Green. When Araminta was only 6 years old, her mother Harriet was sold to a different master so her current master could have some spare cash. Most of her siblings were sold as well. By this age, Araminta was a houseworking slave for her master Edward Brodus, and cared for infants at as early as 5 years of age. I grew up like a neglected weed, ignorant of liberty, having no experience of it. Then I was not happy or contented, said Minty. Minty hated watching other slaves suffer. She had shown her hatred for slavery many times, and her desire to help others grew rapidly at a very young age. When Minty was around 12 years old, she watched a fellow slave be punished. She saw an overseer grab a heavy weight to throw at the slave. She decided to step in between the slave and the weight to save the slave, but she took the hit to the head, cracking her skull open. Because of this, Minty suffered terrible brain damage as well as constant migraines and seizures. After this had happened to her, she started seeing dreams, which she believed to be visions from God Himself, and taking what she saw as signs from Him. This led her to extraordinary circumstances and risky decisions that helped her tremendously during her journey. Few people of color were free at the time, but there was a free man named John Tubman who met Minty and married her at the age of 25, even though it was very unusual for them to be a couple, as she was still enslaved during this time. It was written in her mother's will that on her 45th birthday, her mother, her siblings, and herself would be free. But not only did this not happen, but Minty's master Brodus also decided to put Minty up for sale on this day. After this, Minty was so hurt that she prayed to God that if he couldn't change her master's soul and heart to take him. 1st of March, I began to pray, "Oh Lord, if you ain't never gonna change that man's heart, kill him, Lord, and take him out of the way," Minty prayed. And exactly 1 week after her prayer, Edward Brodus had passed. Minty saw this as a sign to escape, because if God had taken him out of the way, it had to mean something, right? After this, Harriet plotted to escape. September 17th, 1849 was the day that this revolutionary escapism had begun. Harriet began by leaving her land in the middle of the night to see her father. He told her to go to a church and have them pray for her trip. She listened and went. The pastor instructed Minty to follow the North Star, and when she could not, then the river, and if she could not see the river, to follow the sound of it. Then, when she reaches the Promised Land, or what we call Pennsylvania, she must look for a man by the name of William Still of the Philadelphia Vigilance Committee. Minty followed these exact instructions. She journeyed over 100 miles all the way alone to freedom. Minty finally reached freedom in Pennsylvania. She then changed her name to Harriet Tubman to mark her freedom. This was a mix of her mother's name and her husband's. After a year, she could no longer stand the fact that she was free and those whom she loved were not. She felt the need to go back, and so she did. My home, after all, was down in Maryland, because my father, my mother, my brothers and sisters and friends were there. But I was free, and they should be free. Harriet went back to free her husband John first, after she figured out that he had lost his freedom due to being accused of knowing where Harriet went and how. But John believed that Harriet had died, and he remarried a new woman. Harriet was so heartbroken and distraught after this. She asked God why he let her come back. Then she had a vision of the slaves that she had been with over the years. "I have heard their groans and sighs, and seen their tears, and I would give every drop of blood in my veins to free them," Harriet said. She had a plan to take her fellow slaves to the Underground Railroad, which is what they called the trail to get to freedom. But she knew this time they would have to change something. Maybe the way that they went, or maybe they'd have to cross a river to keep it as secluded and confidential as possible, and they would have to hide their identities to make sure that nobody would get caught. Harriet went back and rescued her people and took them with her. She demanded full commitment from them all, threatening them with a pistol if they decided they wanted to turn back. She had made about 13 trips, 100 miles each way. Harriet was nicknamed Moses for leading her people. By this time, she was desperately wanted, dead or alive. Harriet made sure that those who she took were fully committed so that everyone remained safe. But by 1850, the Fugitive Slave Law passed, allowing runaway slaves to be brought back to their masters. So Harriet had to switch up her path and reroute to Canada. She convinced many of those who reached freedom to go back and help her free more, creating a cycle of journeys on the path that they called the Underground Railroad, freeing roughly 100,000 after all these trips. Harriet rescued many slaves. She influenced so many to be fearless and committed like her. Harriet used what God gave her and gave it to others. Despite everything she had already been through, she put herself through more to help other people, and along the way, she taught them to help others as well. She has saved and changed so many lives during her lifespan and opened the minds of so many slaves as well as slave owners. The world without Harriet would be so different today. She helped ensure the final defeat of slavery. Her movements of bravery, along with other conductors, have shaped various parts of our society today. Harriet has filled many with courage and bravery to speak their rights, stand up for what they believe in, and act on what they feel called to. Harriet was much more than just a conductor. She had lots to do with helping speak for women's rights. She was a nurse, leader, spy, and much more. Harriet has played a gigantic role in society today, leading others and breaking barriers to change the world for the better. Harriet Tubman was one of the most courageous conductors ever. She has influenced so many people to stand up for their beliefs, break the barriers of society, and to have hope through everything that they do. She was a pioneer for many and an inspiration to all.
Stand up, take my people with me. Together we are going to a brand new home, far across the river. Can you hear?